Acts Part 2, Session 6. It deals with Acts 16, 11 to 15, and then from 29 to 40. This particular lesson historically deals with Paul's interaction and his ministry in Philippi. And it really is kind of a testimony to his witness. The book of Acts really is a lot about the missionary efforts, the evangelism, discipleship, church planting, leadership development, all the things that we think of now as your typical missions activity. It's a historical record of that. And today, this lesson really could be a focus on witnessing and what it means to witness faithfully. The objective statement I wrote down is faithfully witnessing for Christ means doing so in three kinds of opportunities. And I'm sure they are not limited to these three kinds of opportunities, but we'll see these three kinds of opportunities in the text. The first one we find in verses 11 through 15, and that's witnessing in everyday situations. One of Paul's common patterns when he would go to a new area would be to go to a synagogue. The synagogues came together when there were enough people in them, Jewish people who believed in Judaism and practiced Judaism. It happened when there was enough of those people in an area to actually have a synagogue. Apparently in Philippi there wasn't enough people, so that doesn't mean there were no people that were looking to Jehovah God, but there just weren't enough for a synagogue, or there was no synagogue for some reason. So that's where we get to verse 11, where it says, "Therefore, loosing from Troas, we came with a straight course to Samothracia, and the next day to Neapolis, and from thence to Philippi, which is the chief city of that part of Macedonia and a colony. And we were in that city abiding certain days. And on the Sabbath, we went out of the city by a riverside, where prayer was wont to be made. And we sat down and spake unto the women which resorted thither. And a certain woman named Lydia, a seller of purple, and of the city of Thyatira, which worshipped God, heard us, whose heart the Lord opened, that she attended unto the things which were spoken of Paul. And when she was baptized in her household, she besought us, saying, If ye have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and abide there. And she constrained us." So you see this circumstance. Paul couldn't go to a synagogue, so he just figured, where are people that are worshiping Jehovah God? Where are they at? And it was down by the river. God had it so that there would be women down there. This lady named Lydia, she was someone who owned a house. She was someone that sold luxury goods, purple. So she was a person of means, it seems like. She worshiped God. And Paul was faithful to witness to her. She accepted Christ. She got baptized. And then out of his ministry, he was able to be supported by her. And so you see this opportunity to witness in everyday situations. Paul was just looking for opportunities. Here was an opportunity. God had already been working in this lady's life, and God used this for his purposes. Think about application. If you leave your house with your eyes open, looking for something to happen, looking for opportunities tend to show up. And just in the everyday life, that's what happens. So this was like not a threatening situation. This was not a particularly dramatic. It's just a normal, hey, where do people worship, and do they understand the truth? And let's go reach them. That's the first one, witnessing in this kind of opportunity of the everyday situation. Number two, witnessing in difficult situations. This is, after a while, in between that particular passage and this, there's the story about Paul and Silas and how they, in Philippi, witnessed to a girl who would practice divination. She would do soothsaying, and she would make money for her masters. Paul eventually healed her and sent the spirit out of her, and their bosses got really mad. So they took him to the magistrates. They ended up throwing them in jail. They laid many stripes on him, cast him into prison, and they charged the jailer that was there to keep them safely. And he took them into the inner prison, so that means they're layers deep into the prison, and fastened their feet in stocks, it says in verse 24. And in verse 25, so this is definitely a difficult situation. They're in jail. But it's interesting their response. They were in this jail, and you guys know the story. Paul and Silas in this prison, and they began to sing praises to God. And while that was happening, there's this huge earthquake. All the doors of the were immediately opened up, and the keeper of the prison, if a guy's a jailer and he knows his life is dependent on keeping those people in jail, and all the jail doors open, he knows I'm going to lose my job. So he goes to kill himself. But Paul cried with a loud voice. It says in verse 28, "Do thyself no harm, for we're all here," which is a miracle. Then he called for a light and sprang in and came trembling and fell down before Paul and Silas and brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" What a great question. Apparently they had been talking to him at some level because he's interested in this spiritual aspect of his life. He's obviously looking to Paul and Silas to do that. They'd been praising God, so they had a testimony. And they said, verse 31, and they said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved in thy house." And they spake unto him the word of the Lord to all that were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. I love that. The jailer took him out of the jail, took him to his home, cleaned him up from where they'd gotten beaten. And then he believed. He was baptized, he and all his straightway. Apparently they all believed too. And when he had brought them into his house, he set meat before them, they fed him dinner, and rejoiced, believing in God and with all his house. Paul and Silas demonstrate here that they're faithful enough to witness in the non-difficult situation, and then that led them to witnessing in this difficult situation. And obviously God trusted them with that. God moved in a way that they couldn't have made happen. So this is all God doing it, but they were faithful to do it in this difficult situation. Of course, we often don't witness in everyday situations, so why would God trust us with difficult situations? And that's not to say that we should witness so that we can have difficulty, but often, I said this last week to my class, often the difficulty, the trials may be the price that needs to be paid to reach certain people. And I think that's what happens here. Of course, Paul's thinking about more than himself. He had been beaten. He had been beaten without a trial. They both had, Paul and Silas. They both had been, their rights had been violated. And I don't think that Paul is particularly the kind of guy who's all about like forcing his rights and those kinds of things. I think he was thinking about the people that were believing what he taught them. If you can persecute the leader, you'll persecute the followers. And so you'll see the situation after the earthquake. The people who thought this would be a very simple thing now have a jail that's all broken down, doors that are all opened. I don't know if that meant they couldn't be shut, but earthquake, you can imagine, had a lot of damage. So in verse 35 it says, and when it was day, the magistrates sent the sergeant, saying, "Let those men go." Get those guys out of here. They're causing too many problems. The keeper of the prison told this, saying to Paul, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace." But Paul said unto them, "They have beaten us openly uncondemned," meaning in public they beat us without a trial, being Romans, which would have sent a shiver down the spine of anybody that understood, or anybody that had done that did not follow that. Roman citizens had the right to a trial, and that's not what happened. So they've cast us into prison, and now this thrust us out privily. Nay, verily, but let them come themselves and fetch us out. Tell your bosses to come get us out ourselves, to make this public. And Paul had leverage to do that because he could appeal to Rome, to his Roman citizenship. So it says, and the sergeants told these words to the magistrates, and they feared when they heard they were Romans. They came and besought them, brought them out, desired them to depart of the city. And they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia. And when they had seen the brethren, they comforted them and departed. So you have Paul saying, no, we're not going to make this a private thing. We're going to make this a public thing. And we want the leaders of this city who are willing to go against their own laws to throw us into prison to acknowledge what happened here. And so I think the book said this, the commentary mentioned this, and I think they're onto something. That I think Paul was not just thinking about himself. He's thinking about all those people that had to stay in the city. That's where they lived. That's where they worked. That's where they were part of that place. And he wanted them to stay there and to continue to have a message. And so they needed to have that reputation boosted. The power of God that was working in that place, acknowledged by the government, and for the government to think twice about doing what governments sometimes do and going too far. And so he witnessed in that public way. He's trying to make public the power of the gospel, what God had done. And so there are times not to go privately, but to stand stand up for yourself and to witness in that other kind of way. So I hope that helps you think through all these opportunities, an opportunity in a regular situation, just an everyday situation, a witnessing opportunity in difficulty, and then this witnessing opportunity in the sense of witnessing the power of God to the government, to a city that needed to know that God was powerful and he can do some amazing things. We need to do that. We need to be brave, bold, courageous, and look for the everyday opportunity so that when difficulty comes, we'll be faithful in those times. And when there are opportunities that take a little bit of guts to stand up for what's right, that we would do that too. Session 6, every opportunity. Make sure you apply it to yourself before you apply it to your class. Have a great day.